Unnecessary controversy over languages in Afghanistan. Language is more than just a mode of communication. It is a way to conserve one's culture and pass down history, and also provide a gateway for the rest of the world to explore their society. The history behind Farsi has always been rich, and the language has contributed greatly in many areas such as sciences, literature, philosophy, commerce, and religion. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Pashto. Very little has been done for the advancement of Pashto, and it does not provide any incentive for non-Pashtuns, or anyone else for that matter, to learn it. Pashto has been left behind when it comes to languages. It has no culture or legitimate foundation, and therefore it's very easy for it to disappear. In a world that prides itself in progression and improvement, Pashto has remained the language of tribal and illiterate nomads. Pashto has always been considered a primitive language, originating in the Solomon Mountains. Currently, it's mostly spoken in lawless or tribal areas of Pakistan, southern Afghanistan, and is hardly heard anywhere else. It has recently become synonymous with the Taliban, suicide bombers, and other outlawed groups in southern Afghanistan and tribal areas of Pakistan. All Taliban are Pashtuns, but all Pashtuns are not Taliban. In fact, in Afghanistan, if one wanted an education or be a part of civilization, one had to be fluent or at least familiar with Farsi. Pashtuns are also commonly heard calling the non-Pashtuns the immigrants of Afghanistan. Ironically, they themselves are speaking the language of the so-called immigrants. In America, it's the immigrants that have to learn the official language of the country, which is English, in order to survive and have a life. It is the same way in Afghanistan. Those that cannot or do not want to learn English in America often have translators and or live in ghetto communities, surrounding themselves with others like themselves. Another commonality among Pashtuns in Afghanistan. Farsi is the dominant language in the government's offices, at official meetings, in the courts, in publications, on the radios, on television programs, and especially in the areas of education. Pashto speakers often complain that their language has always been discriminated against. If only they were aware that it is their own people who have been discriminating against the language and have even gone so far as to damage it as well. The Putta Khazana has single-handedly caused more harm to Pashto than anything else could have. The fraudulent anthropology has been tried to be passed off as an authentic work of literature. Its inventor Abdullah Bibi claimed that it contains Pashto literature dating as far back as the 7th century. If Pashto had existed that far back, it would not be in the position that it is today. The language is very limited in words and descriptions. As a Chinese philosopher once said, "The limits of my language means the limits of my world." This is true in the case of Pashto. Pashto has not contributed anything worthwhile to Afghanistan, let alone the world. However, the Pashtuns force the language onto the public when their own people do not speak it. Pride keeps them from admitting that Pashto has no relevance or importance to the country except to the primitive tribes in the south and the Taliban. So great is their resentment and jealousy that they are putting pressure on officials to include it in the government offices, and educational areas such as schools and universities. One will notice that Pashtuns across the border in Pakistan have dropped their Pashto and their nomadic lifestyle adopted one of the major Pakistani cultures and languages. This is another example of how their own people are damaging their own language. Something must be wrong with the language if its own people won't work towards the advancement of it. Though it's still primarily communicated orally, some Pashto literature has been written down and preserved, although very little of it. The literature that has been written down is mainly focused on ethnocentrism, whereas Rumi, Omar Khayyam, Hafiz, Sa'di, Avicenna do not speak of their ethnicity. Most of the Pashto literature that exists today focuses on their own ethnicity. Take Khushal Khan Khattak for example. He's an icon of Pashto, or he's considered the greatest writer or poet in Pashto language by his Pashtuns. I mean, this guy is also totally unknown to everyone else. Khattak always writes for or about Pashtuns. Khattak has used his poetry to curse his own people and at the same time instill a sense of false pride that has not benefited them. No one else in the world will be able to relate to Pashto literature since it highlights only the small world of Pashtuns.